I love Star Wars, and that's not really something that I've ever talked about on this channel. And after The Force Awakens came out, when everyone was kind of starting to speculate about who Rey's family might be, I got very involved with the whole discussion, all of the theories, all of the speculation, and now there have been trailers and TV spots and interviews and stuff about The Last Jedi, and it's kind of sparked my interest again. I've started to think about it a little more, and so I think now is a good time for me to address what I think the situation is with Rey's lineage. A lot of videos have been made about this already by people who are far more informed than I am and people who are probably far more articulate than I am. And I will be talking about a lot of the things that those people have talked about already, but I think I'm going to be mentioning some things which I haven't really noticed anybody else on here talk about. Hopefully this is worth making, and this adds something to the discussion that maybe hasn't been brought up already. A few disclaimers. One is that this is just a theory, it is just fan speculation. I could be completely wrong. Right before the season finale for season 3 of Rebels came out, I posted a long post on Tumblr about what I thought might happen in the episode and how I thought it might tie in to Rey's parentage, but I was wrong. I watched the episode when it aired and I was just incorrect. So with that in mind, remember that I'm not an authority on this and I'm probably incorrect about a lot of the specifics, but I think in general I have a very valid argument. But again, it is just fan speculation. I also might neglect to mention a lot of things. I have some notes written here, some very sparse notes. I might not cover all of it, but I'm going to try to. But even this list of things that I have to talk about is probably missing some stuff. Also, some things might be a stretch, but they are things that I think can be applied to this theory. Another disclaimer is that this has nothing to do with ships. You know how people like to ship characters together? This has nothing to do with any of that. I've seen a lot of people come up with certain theories about Rey's parentage in order to support or debunk ships. That's not what I'm doing here. I mean, I've seen people want Rey to be a Kenobi, which is the argument that I will be putting forward. But I've seen people arguing that because they want her to not be related to Kylo so that they can get together, they want Reylo to happen. I've also heard people say that they want her to be a Skywalker just so that Reylo doesn't happen. Now, I fall more into that camp because it's a ship that I find extremely distasteful and I would prefer if it didn't happen. I'm what Reylos would probably call an anti. But again, this video and my personal feelings about her family have nothing to do with the ship itself. Why is my laptop being so loud? There are a few very quick little things about Rey being a Kenobi that a lot of people have already said, the ones that pretty much everybody covers, the fact that their accent is similar, which has been attributed to the fact that she was raised by Unkar Plutt on Jakku, who also has an English accent, but when you see her in her flashback, she is already a child. Like, she has already grown into her accent. She already probably has her English accent, so being raised by Obi-Wan could be the reason for her accent. Again, like other people have said, their outfits are very similar, and the scene on Starkiller Base where she climbs the reactors and like stealthily moves around Starkiller Base is very similar to when Obi-Wan in A New Hope does the same thing on the Death Star. Also, there is the whole thing about how it would be very cool if in the original trilogy a Kenobi trains a Skywalker, and then in this trilogy a Skywalker, i.e. Luke, trains a Kenobi. It also seems unlikely to me that they would kind of ignore the Kenobi family line, and I think the fact that Kylo's real name is Ben and is probably named after Obi-Wan Kenobi suggests that he's gonna be significant in the trilogy. Also, at one point Daisy Ridley said that a big clue relating to who her family is that Rey is solitary. And whilst it's true that both she and Luke did live like on desert planets in a relatively secluded area, Luke wasn't solitary, he lived with his aunt and uncle. Both Rey and Obi-Wan take Anakin's lightsaber and hand it to Luke. In the original Star Wars film, Obi-Wan hires Han Solo to do a job for/with him, and in The Force Awakens, Han offers Rey a job. Then we have Rey's Force vision that she has when she touches Anakin's lightsaber. And I think there are a couple of things in there that kind of hint that she's at least not a Skywalker. One is that both Alec Guinness's voice and Ewan McGregor's voice are heard in that scene, especially given that Ewan McGregor recorded new lines specifically for it. And although she sees Luke in a very brief clip where she doesn't see his face, he doesn't speak to her in the way that Obi-Wan does. Also, it shows Rey as a child, like I mentioned before, and she is a child. She's not a toddler, she's not a baby, she is a child. And so I feel like she at least has some memory of her parents. At least she probably does. It could be argued that her memory was wiped or something before she was dropped off on Jakku, but if she can remember screaming and crying as her family flew away from her, why wouldn't they have gotten rid of that memory as well? So it's likely that they didn't erase her memory and that she still at least has vague recollections of her family. And I feel like she would know if Luke was. It seems unlikely that she would forget her dad to enough of an extent that she would have to say the line, "I thought he was a myth." Whereas if Obi-Wan is her grandfather, there's a chance that even though she remembers her parents, she doesn't remember or know who Obi-Wan is because he might not have had a part in her life or her growing up. So her not remembering Obi-Wan seems more likely than her not remembering Luke. I also don't think Kylo shows any indication of recognizing her. It's been argued that he does, but I personally can't see that. He never refers to her by name or makes any suggestion that he knows who she is or that they're related. He refers to her exclusively as the girl, apart from the one time when he says, "You, a scavenger." He doesn't use her name and he shows no indication of being a relative of hers. Also, in one of the new TV spots for The Last Jedi, Luke says the words, "Who are you?" And it's not definitely being spoken to Rey, but I feel like it very easily could be, given that all of the footage that we've seen of Luke is him interacting with Rey. And if he is asking who she is, again, that would mean that she's not his daughter. Although The Force Awakens, the script right at the end when she goes to find him says that he doesn't need to ask her who she is or what she's doing there, which does directly, contradict that little element of the theory. But also J.J. Abrams did definitively say that Rey's parents aren't in The Force Awakens at all. One of the last lines of The Force Awakens novelization, when Rey hands Luke the lightsaber, it says, "An offer, a plea, the galaxy's only hope." And I think this is referring to Luke, but it could be referring to Rey. If the galaxy's only hope part is referring to Rey, then it obviously draws a very distinct connection between her and Obi-Wan. And if the only hope part is referring to Luke, I feel like it mirrors Obi-Wan and Luke again in the same way that a Skywalker training a Kenobi mirrors a Kenobi training a Skywalker. Because where before a Skywalker was reaching out to Obi-Wan Kenobi and saying that he was their only hope, in this case it would be a Kenobi reaching out to a Skywalker and referring to him as their only hope. There's also the argument that I've seen that the trilogy is about the Skywalkers, so it would make no sense for Rey to not be a Skywalker given that the entire franchise is about the Skywalker family, and to that I would say that the Skywalkers are already a large presence in this trilogy. For one, Kylo is a Skywalker. He doesn't have the Skywalker surname, but he is a Skywalker. And also, Luke is in this trilogy. If it is about his relationship with Rey, whether they're parent and child or not, it's about a Skywalker. So I don't think that Rey not being a Skywalker would somehow mean that their family was absent from the trilogy, or at least not the focal point of the trilogy. I've also seen it argued that Obi-Wan wouldn't have a child because it was against the Jedi Order, Well, for one, that argument can also be applied to Luke. It's likely that Luke doesn't adhere to that, especially given that he does say it's time for the Jedi to end, but I also believe that Obi-Wan wouldn't adhere to that rule. If you watch the Clone Wars animated series, you meet Satine Kryze, who is a character that he is, or at least used to be, in love with. And he says to her that if she had asked him to, he would have left the Jedi Order. When Obi-Wan falls in love, he falls in love strongly enough that he is willing to break the rules of the Jedi Order. And even if he wasn't, once he's in exile, the Jedi Order doesn't exist anymore. It has crumbled, it has been disbanded, if you will. It doesn't exist anymore, and there is no reason for him to follow their rules. There are also a couple of things in the clips from The Last Jedi that we've seen. In the clips, we very clearly see that Luke has a small library sort of area, and he in particular focuses on this one book, which has the Jedi Order symbol on the front. In the comics, Luke finds a crate, I think it is, that has journals in it. They are the journals of Ben Kenobi, and it says "For Luke" on it. So Luke has those in his possession, and I think there is a chance, however strong or otherwise, that the books in Luke's possession in The Last Jedi could be the journals of Ben Kenobi. Although I will say that in the film, like I said, it has the Jedi Order logo on it. In the comics it says the Journal of Ben Kenobi in Arabesh. But I also think that it's likely that Luke may have Obi-Wan's lightsaber in his possession. As we know, Obi-Wan was killed by Darth Vader on the Death Star. We presume that, or at least I presume, that he then took Obi-Wan's lightsaber. I can't remember if it definitely shows that he does or not. I can't remember at all, but I believe that he probably kept Obi-Wan's lightsaber. Then, after Darth Vader dies, we know that Luke keeps Darth Vader's body. We know that because he has a funeral scene. It may be possible that Luke found Obi-Wan's lightsaber in Anakin's possession and now has it. I also want to talk about a parallel between two fight scenes. The fight scene at the end of The Force Awakens with Rey and Finn and Kylo tends to be linked with the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and I feel like that is definitely a valid comparison, especially if she is a Kenobi, because it would be interesting if they were both fights between a Skywalker and a Kenobi, but I feel like there's a much more distinct and valid comparison to be made by the closing fight scene of The Phantom Menace and the closing fight scene in The Force Awakens. The fight between Rey and Finn and Kylo, I think, can more accurately be compared to the fight between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul. I think they have a lot of similarities, and I also think that their placement within the trilogy is very important. In both films, the big fight at the end is the first time you really see that kind of lightsaber combat happening, and it's in a roughly similar place in both films, right towards the end in the third act of the film. Also, they both happen in the first episode of the trilogy, meaning that they are both the first main lightsaber battle that we see in the trilogy. Now I want to talk about the two fight scenes narratively and in terms of the progression of events. When I refer to the character in question, I am referring to Obi-Wan and Rey. But in both of those fight scenes, the character in question is almost immediately disengaged from the fight. Obi-Wan gets stuck behind those lasers, you know, that red laser grid, and Rey is thrown against a tree by Kylo and knocked out. In both, the other hero, i.e. Qui-Gon and Finn, go on to fight the villain single-handedly. And in both, the incapacitated character, i.e. Obi-Wan and Rey, watch the villain defeat the other hero. At which point the character in question rejoins the fight and battles the villain single-handedly. Also in both, the character in question is put into a compromising situation by the villain. In the case of Obi-Wan, he falls down that big hole, and Kylo pushes Rey right up against the edge of a crumbling cliff face. Both of them are at risk of falling to their deaths, and in both, the character in question taps into their Force ability to remove themselves from that situation. So in Obi-Wan's case, he uses the Force to propel himself out of the hole, and in Rey's case, she taps into the Force just to push back against Kylo and resume the fight on more even terms. Also, even though both of these things happen at different points in the fight, both Rey and Obi-Wan use the Force to draw their fallen ally's lightsaber to them. I know that the lightsaber doesn't belong to Finn, but he was using it, so they both do that, and I think that's also a very, very important comparison. Most people tend to link Rey using the Force to get Anakin's lightsaber to the scene where Luke does that in Empire Strikes Back, but I think it's more likely to be a callback to when Obi-Wan did it in The Phantom Menace, but just because of the context of the fight and all of the other parallels that happen in that scene. Both the characters in question are given the opportunity to kill the villain and don't. It could be argued that both of them were intending to kill the other. Obi-Wan was definitely intending to kill Maul because he cut him in half. And it's also unlikely that Rey is already proficient enough with a lightsaber that she can deliberately slice his face without killing him. When she aimed for his face, chances are she was trying to kill him. And neither of them succeed, and I think that's also an important parallel. Then the character in question runs to their fallen ally's side. And interestingly, by the time they do that, neither of the heroes, neither of their allies are actually dead. Both of them have survived the duration of the fight, although obviously Qui-Gon does immediately die. So I think both in terms of the events of the fights, the placement of the fight within the episode, and the placement of the fight within the trilogy as a whole, those two are the most significant scenes that parallel each other in the entirety of The Force Awakens. Okay, so speaking just in terms of things that happen in the first episodes of the trilogies again, in the first episode of the prequel trilogy, you see Obi-Wan, like I said, use the Force to grab Qui-Gon's lightsaber, and this is the first time this happens. If you watch the films chronologically, starting with episode 1, this is the first time that you have seen that ability used. This is the first time you have seen a character call a lightsaber to them using the Force. In A New Hope, in the first episode of the original trilogy, Obi-Wan uses a Jedi mind trick on a stormtrooper. And again, this is the first time in the trilogy that you have seen this ability used. So if you were to watch those two trilogies independently of one another, the first time you see someone call a lightsaber to them using the Force is Obi-Wan in The Phantom Menace, and the first time you see someone use a Jedi mind trick is in A New Hope, and it's also Obi-Wan. In The Force Awakens, you see Rey use both of the abilities. You see her call a lightsaber to her, and you see her use a Jedi mind trick, again on a stormtrooper. And if you are to watch this trilogy independently of the others, that's the first time you've seen either of those abilities used. So I feel like the fact that each of these abilities is introduced in each of the trilogies by a Kenobi, I think that would be really cool. I feel like I've definitely covered enough, and that you're probably sick of me talking about this, so I'm gonna stop. I haven't covered everything. I mean, again, I'm not really trying to change anybody's mind. I'm not trying to convince people that Rey is a Kenobi. I'm not trying to make people stop having their own theories. I just wanted somewhere where I could document all of my thoughts in a more coherent way than just having them all knocking about in my head. But yeah, have a good whatever it is you're having, day, night, and watch Wonder Woman.